The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the bridal suite as Elena stood in front of the mirror. The wedding dress she had spent months choosing fit perfectly, the delicate lace catching the light just so. Her dark hair was styled in loose waves, adorned with tiny pearl pins that matched her grandmother's necklace. Everything was perfect, except for the phone trembling in her hand and the tears threatening to spill onto her cheeks. 3 days, just 3 days before she was supposed to walk down the aisle, and now this message glowing on her screen. "I can't go through with the wedding. I'm sorry." That was it. After 5 years together, Blake had ended their relationship with a text message. Elena's best friend Mai rushed into the room, champagne bottle in hand, ready for the final dress-fitting celebration. Her smile faded instantly when she saw Elena's face. "What happened?" Mai asked, setting down the bottle. Elena couldn't speak. She just handed over the phone, watching as Mai's expression shifted from confusion to shock to fury. "He did this by text? Is he serious?" Mai looked up, her eyes blazing. "Have you called him?" Elena nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. "He's not answering. His assistant said he's in meetings all day and can't be disturbed." Meetings? Of course. Blake's company always came first. As the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country, his time was precious. Elena had understood that, had supported him through late nights and missed anniversaries, had rearranged her own promising career as a corporate lawyer to fit around his more demanding schedule. The other bridesmaids arrived within the hour, bringing more champagne and outrage. The wedding planner came too, her clipboard clutched to her chest, talking about deposits and cancellation fees. Elena barely heard them. Through the fog of shock, something else was taking shape. A cold, clear anger that grew stronger with each passing minute. 280 guests, she said finally, cutting through the chatter in the room. 280 people who need to be told that the man I was going to marry decided, 3 days before, that he'd changed his mind. Her phone buzzed with another message, not from Blake, but from his mother. "I've just heard. I'm so sorry, dear. Blake says it's for the best." For the best. As if canceling a wedding at the last minute could ever be described that way. As if the humiliation Elena now faced was just an unfortunate side effect of her ex-fiance's sudden clarity. By evening, Elena had moved from her bridal suite to Mai's apartment. She sat on the couch, still in her day clothes, scrolling through her phone. Social media was already buzzing with rumors. Blake's company was set to announce a major acquisition, people said. The timing of the wedding would have been bad for business. Others whispered about Blake's close relationship with his new chief financial officer, a former model turned business school graduate. "Look at this," Elena said, holding out her phone to Mai. On the screen was a photo taken just last week at a charity gala. Blake stood at a podium, accepting an award for entrepreneurial excellence. In his speech, which Elena had helped him write, he had thanked her for being his foundation and future. The crowd had awed and applauded. What a performance! Elena switched off her phone and stared at the blank screen, seeing her dim reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, someone naive, trusting, and ultimately foolish. "You know what the worst part is?" she said to Mai, who was pouring them both a generous measure of whiskey. "I gave up so much for him. Turned down that partnership track at my firm. Moved across the country. Rearranged my whole life to fit into his." Mai handed her the glass. "So what are you going to do now?" Elena took a long sip, feeling the burn of the alcohol match the fire growing inside her. "First, I'm going to return all these wedding gifts." She gestured to the stack of boxes in the corner of Mai's living room. "Then I'm going to figure out exactly why Blake really called off this wedding." She set down her glass with a decisive clink against the coffee table. "And then I'm going to make sure he regrets ever thinking he could throw me away like I was nothing." Mai raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like the Elena I know." "The Elena you knew died when she got that text message," she replied, her voice steady and cold. "The woman's sitting here now. She's got nothing left to lose." As night fell over the city, Elena's phone remained silent. No more messages, no calls, no explanations. But in that silence, a plan was beginning to take shape, one that would soon turn Blake's perfectly ordered world completely upside down. Elena stared at the glossy magazine spread on Mai's coffee table. There they were, she and Blake, smiling at each other on the balcony of his penthouse office. The headline read, "Power Couple Perfection: How Blake Chen Built a Tech Empire with His Better Half." The article had come out just 2 weeks ago. "I can't believe this," Elena muttered, flipping through the pages. "Listen to this part. Chen credits his fiancée with keeping him grounded as his company soars to new heights. What a joke." May peered over her shoulder. "Wasn't this interview on the same day he missed your birthday dinner?" Elena nodded, remembering how she'd sat alone at the restaurant for nearly an hour before getting his text about an emergency investor meeting. She'd ended up taking the fancy cake she'd ordered home in a box and eating it alone in front of the TV. "You know what's weird?" Elena said, closing the magazine. "Looking back, I can see all these moments where things started changing, but I just made excuses for him." 6 months ago, Blake had brought in a new chief financial officer, Vanessa. Tall, brilliant, with degrees from all the right schools, Vanessa had quickly become Blake's right hand. Their late-night strategy sessions became more frequent. Whenever Elena questioned them, Blake would brush it off. "She's helping us position for the IPO," or "We're restructuring the entire financial department." Elena had believed him because she wanted to. She'd ignored the way Vanessa looked at Blake during company parties, how they seemed to share private jokes, how Vanessa always managed to sit next to him at every meeting. "I gave up my partnership track for him," Elena said, pacing Me's living room now. "Remember? That offer from Dixon and Powell. Senior partner within 5 years." And he said, "But you'd be so busy, and my company needs me right now. We're a team, right?" Me nodded, remembering how excited Elena had been about that offer and how quickly she turned it down when Blake had raised concerns. "You really loved him." "I really was stupid," Elena corrected her. She grabbed her laptop and opened it. "Let's see what Mr. Tech Genius is up to now." She pulled up the business news sites she regularly checked to keep up with Blake's industry. The top headline made her freeze. "Chen Technologies filing for IPO next month. Sources say valuation could hit $4 billion. An IPO? May looked confused. "Isn't that a big deal?" "It's huge," Elena said, her legal mind already connecting dots. "It's why he ended things. A public offering means intense scrutiny. Every aspect of the company and its leadership gets put under a microscope." Elena clicked through more articles. There was Blake shaking hands with the governor at a tech conference 3 days ago. There he was again, ringing the opening bell at the stock exchange as a special guest last week, all while telling Elena he was swamped with internal meetings. "He's been planning this for months," she said, her voice hollow. "All those nights he was working late, he was preparing for this." She pulled up another tab and logged into her email. There it was, the invitation to the company's year-end party scheduled for next week. She was still on the list. Apparently, no one had thought to remove the CEO's ex-fiancée from the email group yet. "Look at this, celebrating our journey to becoming a public company," Elena read aloud. The party theme. "He knew when he proposed to me last year that this was coming. Our wedding would have been right in the middle of the quiet period before the IPO. That's not allowed." May looked confused. "What's a quiet period?" "It's the time before a company goes public when executives have to be very careful about what they say and do," Elena explained, her lawyer training kicking in. "No big life changes, no flashy spending, nothing that could make investors nervous." She closed the laptop, her mind racing. "He didn't just wake up 3 days ago and decide our relationship wasn't working. He calculated this. Our wedding date became inconvenient for his business plans, so he cut me loose." Elena walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Blake was probably celebrating with his executive team. Maybe Vanessa was right there beside him, ready to step into the role of supportive partner, one who wouldn't complicate his perfect IPO narrative. "You know," Elena said softly, "when we first met, Blake was just starting his company. He was working out of his friend's garage, pitching to any investor who would listen. I believed in him when no one else did. I edited his business plan. I introduced him to my law school friends, who became his first investors." She turned back to May, her expression hardening. "I helped build what he has now. And if he thinks he can just erase me from the story and move on to his picture-perfect IPO, he's about to learn how wrong he is." May looked worried. What are you planning? Elena picked up her phone. First, I need to make some calls. There are people who know the real Blake Chen, people he stepped on during his climb to the top, and I bet they'd love to talk to me. A week after the cancelled wedding, Elena finally emerged from May's apartment. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a cold determination that surprised even her. She'd spent days fielding pitying texts and calls, declining offers to trash-talk Blake over wine, and scrolling through business news as Chen Technologies prepared for its big public offering. Today was different. Today she had a plan. Elena stood outside a small coffee shop downtown, checking her watch. The woman she was meeting had worked at Chen Technologies for 3 years before being let go 6 months ago. According to the company, Lena Rodriguez had been downsized during restructuring. According to Lena's LinkedIn messages to Elena, there was much more to the story. Elena, a woman with short dark hair approached, hand extended. Thanks for meeting me. They found a quiet corner table, away from other customers. Elena studied Lena as she stirred her coffee. She had been the head of marketing during the company's critical growth phase. I was surprised to get your message, Lena said. Even more surprised when I heard about the wedding. Elena nodded. I think we might have similar experiences with Blake. Let me guess, Lena said with a bitter smile. He made big promises, used your talents, then discarded you when you became inconvenient to his plans. Something like that, Elena replied. What really happened with your job? Lena glanced around before leaning in. I developed the marketing strategy that got Chen Technologies its first major clients. Blake praised my work to my face, then presented it as his own to the board. Standard practice for him, so I wasn't even surprised. She took a sip of coffee before continuing. What got me fired was discovering financial reports that didn't add up. Revenue numbers that magically increased between draft versions. Customer data that seemed inflated. Elena felt her pulse quicken. You're saying he's faking company data? I'm saying I asked too many questions. A week later, I was out with a severance package that came with a strict non-disclosure agreement. Lena pulled out her phone. But I kept copies of everything. I may have signed an NDA, but you didn't. By the end of the day, Elena had met with 3 more former employees. A programmer who claimed Blake had stolen his code. A finance assistant who'd been asked to adjust expense reports. A former assistant who had booked hotel rooms for Blake and Vanessa on supposed separate business trips. Back at May's apartment that evening, Elena spread her notes across the kitchen table. This is a lot, May said, scanning the pages. You really think he's been cooking the books? I don't know yet, Elena replied. But I know who might. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Raj, it's Elena Thompson. I know it's been a while. Yes, I heard you started your own investigation firm. That's actually why I'm calling. I need your help. Raj had been her study partner through law school. Now he ran a small but respected private investigation firm specializing in corporate misconduct. If anyone could help her verify what she learned today, it was him. I'll need a retainer, Raj said after she explained the situation. And Elena, are you sure about this? Going after a guy like Chen could get messy. He already made it messy, Elena replied, thinking of the unopened wedding gifts she still needed to return. I just want the truth. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena settled into a new routine. Mornings were spent in coffee shops with former Chen Technologies employees, collecting their stories. Afternoons were dedicated to reviewing the documents Raj sent over, financial statements, internal emails, board meeting minutes, all obtained through his network of sources. Evenings were for strategy. Elena's legal training came in handy as she pieced together a timeline of Blake's questionable decisions. Look at this, she told May one night, pointing to her laptop screen. 3 months ago, Blake told investors they had signed deals with 5 major retail chains. But according to these internal emails, 2 of those deals fell through weeks earlier. He never corrected the statement. Is that illegal? May asked. For a private company, it's unethical. For a company about to go public. Elena raised an eyebrow. That's securities fraud. The SEC takes that very seriously. Elena had also been carefully monitoring Blake's public appearances. He seemed untouchable, confident, the golden boy of the tech world. His company's valuation kept climbing as the IPO approached. Financial magazines praised his vision and leadership. None of them knew what Elena now knew. On her phone, she scrolled through photos from their relationship. Blake accepting awards, Blake at charity events, Blake at the governor's mansion. Always smiling, always perfect. She paused on a photo of them together at a company party last year, his arm around her waist as he charmed investors. She zoomed in on his face, seeing it now with new eyes. The practiced smile, the calculated charm. Had any of it been real? Her phone buzzed with a text from Raj. Got something big. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Elena set down the phone, a strange calmness settling over her. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of Blake's fall from grace, and no one, not even Blake himself, would see it coming. None of them knew what Elena now knew. On her phone, she scrolled through photos from their relationship. Blake accepting awards, Blake at charity events, Blake at the governor's mansion. Always smiling, always perfect. She paused on a photo of them together at a company party last year, his arm around her waist as he charmed investors. She zoomed in on his face, seeing it now with new eyes. The practiced smile, the calculated charm. Had any of it been real? Her phone buzzed with a text from Raj. Got something big. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Elena set down the phone, a strange calmness settling over her. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of Blake's fall from grace, and no one, not even Blake himself, would see it coming. The cafe buzzed with morning chatter as Elena slid into the booth across from Raj. His expression told her that whatever he'd found was significant. You look different, Raj said, studying her face. More like the Elena I knew in law school. The one who never backed down from a fight. Elena smiled slightly. Let's just say I've remembered who I used to be. What did you find? Raj slid a folder across the table. Chen Technologies is built on Sand, their flagship security software, the one that supposedly protects half the banking systems in the country. It has a critical flaw that Blake and his team have known about for at least 8 months. Elena flipped through the documents, internal emails, test results, all showing that the company's star product had a vulnerability that hackers could easily exploit. More disturbing were the emails showing Blake had instructed his team to hide this information from clients and investors. He's telling the public that their software is bulletproof while knowing it's anything but, Raj explained. If this got out, especially before the IPO, the stock would tank. Elena finished his thought. And any clients using their software would immediately switch to competitors. She closed the folder, mind racing. This is bigger than I expected. I thought maybe he'd bent some rules, but this? This is fraud, Raj said flatly. Securities fraud, consumer fraud, you name it. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? Elena thought carefully. Going directly to the authorities would certainly damage Blake, but it might also hurt innocent employees and customers. She needed a more targeted approach. I need to make a few calls, she said finally. 3 days later, Elena sat in her new apartment, watching financial news on her laptop. She'd moved out of May's place, found a small but comfortable studio, and started putting her life back together. She'd even reached out to her old law firm about returning. But today, her focus was elsewhere. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Breaking news in the tech sector today. Chen Technologies has announced a delay in their much-anticipated initial public offering after questions were raised about their financial projections. The company's stock, which trades privately, has dropped 15% on the news. Elena smiled. She hadn't gone to regulators, not yet. Instead, she'd anonymously sent selected documents to 3 financial journalists known for their thorough reporting on tech companies. Not everything Raj had found, just enough to raise serious questions about Chen Technologies' revenue projections and product claims. Her phone buzzed with a text from May. Are you watching this? Is this your doing? Just phase 1, Elena typed back. The news segment cut to footage of Blake leaving the company headquarters, surrounded by reporters. He looked nothing like the confident CEO she'd known. His face was tight with stress, his usual smooth responses replaced by clipped no comments. Sources inside the company tell us that investors are demanding answers about discrepancies in recent growth reports, the reporter continued. Chen has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. Elena switched off the laptop and walked to her window. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time since receiving that devastating text message, she felt a sense of control returning. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Curious, she answered. "Elena, it's Vanessa Park." Elena froze at the sound of the CFO's voice. "How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter," Vanessa said, her usual confidence notably absent. "We need to talk. About Blake." "I have nothing to say to you," Elena replied coldly. "You don't understand," Vanessa pressed. "He's blaming me for the financial discrepancies. He's telling the board I manipulated the numbers without his knowledge. He's setting me up to take the fall." Elena wasn't surprised. Of course, Blake would sacrifice someone else to save himself. "Why should I care?" Elena asked, though she already knew where this was heading. "Because I have proof that he was behind everything," Vanessa said. "Emails, recorded meetings, his direct instructions to change the numbers. And I know about the software vulnerability too. He made the decision to hide it." Elena sat down slowly. "What are you suggesting?" "A meeting, just you and me, tomorrow." Vanessa's voice dropped. "I'm not going down for his mistakes." After hanging up, Elena walked to her closet and pulled out a small box she'd hidden away. Inside was the envelope she'd received at her door the previous day, a heavy cream-colored envelope containing an invitation to the Chen Technologies pre-IPO gala still scheduled for the following week. Someone, perhaps Blake's assistant who had always liked Elena, had made sure she received it, even though she was no longer Blake's fiancée. Elena held the invitation, an idea forming. Blake's carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, but this was just the beginning. The real blow would come when she walked into that gala with everything she now knew. She picked up her phone to call Raj. "I need one more favor. It's time for phase 2. The upscale hotel restaurant was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon. Elena spotted Vanessa immediately, sitting in a corner booth, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Thank you for meeting me," Vanessa said as Elena slid into the seat across from her. "I'm here because I'm curious," Elena replied coolly. "Nothing more." A server approached, but Vanessa waved him away. She opened her designer bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "Everything's on here," she said, pushing it across the table. "Emails where Blake directly ordered me to inflate the growth numbers. Meeting recordings where he specifically says to hide the security flaw from potential investors. It's all there." Elena didn't touch the drive. "Why are you doing this?" "You two seemed close." Vanessa's laugh was hollow. "Close? I'm as useful to him, just like you were. Just like everyone is until they're not." She leaned forward. "You know what he said when the board started asking questions? He said, Vanessa handled all the financials. If there are discrepancies, you should look at her." "That sounds like Blake," Elena murmured. "He's calling me in tomorrow to fire me in front of the board," Vanessa continued. "He needs a scapegoat, and I'm it." She nodded at the flash drive. "I'm not going down alone." Elena finally picked up the drive. "What do you want me to do with this?" "Whatever you want," Vanessa said, standing up. "I just want him to face consequences for once in his life." She paused before leaving. "By the way, he was already seeing someone else before he called off your wedding. Some investor's daughter. Just thought you should know." After Vanessa left, Elena sat for a long time, turning the flash drive over in her hands. Another betrayal to add to the list. Back at her apartment, Elena plugged in the drive and spent hours going through its contents. Vanessa hadn't exaggerated. The evidence was damning. Blake had not only known about the problems, but had actively worked to conceal them. Elena forwarded selected files to Raj with a message, "Need to verify these are authentic." Her phone rang almost immediately. "Where did you get these?" Raj asked without preamble. "Blake's CFO is unhappy about being thrown under the bus," Elena explained. "Are they real?" "The timestamps and metadata look legitimate," Raj confirmed. "Elena, this is explosive stuff. If this gets out, Blake isn't just looking at a failed IPO. He could face criminal charges." Elena stayed out her window at the city lights. "I need to be smart about this." The next morning, Elena made 3 careful moves. First, she sent an anonymous email to Thomas Weber, the chairman of Chen Technologies' board of directors. It contained just one file, a recorded meeting where Blake instructed Vanessa to make the numbers work for the investor presentation. No explanation, no demands, just the cold, hard evidence. Second, she forwarded different documents to Blake's biggest investor, Richard Patel, whose firm had pumped nearly $50 million into the company. These showed Blake had been secretly meeting with competing investment firms, suggesting he was planning to dilute Patel's share. Third, and most personally satisfying, she sent Blake's assistant the security flaw documentation with a simple note. He's known about this for 8 months. When it fails, you'll be blamed too. The assistant had always been loyal to Blake, but Elena knew she was also diligent and ethical. She wouldn't be able to ignore this. By lunchtime, Elena's phone was buzzing with texts from me. Something's happening at Chentech. People are saying there's an emergency board meeting. Blake cancelled all his appointments. Elena smiled. The timing was perfect. The gala was tomorrow night, the company's big celebration before going public. The event where Blake would stand in front of everyone who mattered in the tech world and present himself as a visionary leader. But now the carefully constructed image was beginning to crack. Board members were asking questions, investors were concerned, and Blake's inner circle was turning against him. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Raj. Patel's people are at Chentech offices right now. Word is they're demanding to review all financial records. Elena closed her laptop and picked up the invitation to tomorrow's gala. She ran her finger over the embossed lettering, announcing the celebration of Chen Technologies' journey to success. She had already RSVP'd with a simple yes, no explanation, no +1, just the confirmation that Elena Thompson would attend. Time for the final act, she murmured, setting the invitation on her nightstand and opening her closet to find the perfect dress. She hadn't planned to wear red to her wedding, but for Blake's downfall, it seemed appropriate. The ballroom of the Grand Peninsula Hotel glittered with lights and success. Waiters glided between groups of well-dressed guests, offering champagne and exotic appetizers. A string quartet played softly in the corner. This was supposed to be Chen Technologies' victory lap before their triumphant entry into the public market. Elena adjusted her red dress and took a deep breath before stepping through the doors. Conversations paused briefly as people noticed her. She was, after all, the woman who should have been Blake's wife by now. The whispers followed her across the room. Can you believe she showed up? I heard he left her for that investor's daughter. So awkward. Elena ignored them, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. She scanned the room, noting who was there, and more importantly, who wasn't. No sign of Vanessa. The board chairman, Thomas Weber, stood in deep conversation with Richard Patel, their expressions serious despite the celebratory atmosphere. And then she spotted Blake. He stood near the stage, surrounded by admirers as usual, but Elena could see the strain in his smile. His eyes kept darting to the entrance, perhaps watching for late-arriving board members. When he saw Elena, he froze mid-sentence. For a moment, their eyes locked across the crowded room. Elena raised her glass slightly, a mocking toast. Blake excused himself from his group and made his way toward her. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly when he reached her, his smile fixed in place for anyone watching. "I was invited," Elena replied simply. "Nice party. Though I noticed several key investors aren't here. Trouble in paradise." Blake's jaw tightened. "I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "Mr. Chen." A voice interrupted them. Thomas Weber stood there, his expression grim. "We need to speak. Now." "I'm in the middle of something," Blake said, his voice tight. "Now," Weber repeated, glancing briefly at Elena. "Patel's threatening to pull his funding unless we get answers about those emails." Blake's face paled slightly. "What emails?" Weber leaned closer. "The ones where you apparently told your team to misrepresent the quarterly results. The boardroom. 5 minutes." He walked away without waiting for a response. Blake turned back to Elena, realization dawning in his eyes. "This is your doing." Elena sipped her champagne. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but it sounds serious." "You won't get away with this," Blake hissed before striding away, following Weber. Elena watched him go, feeling oddly calm. Around her, the party continued, but there was an undercurrent of tension. Small groups huddled in corners, speaking in hushed tones. Several guests were checking their phones, perhaps reading the business news alerts that had just started breaking about potential accounting irregularities at Chen Technologies. "You actually came," May said, appearing at Elena's side in a stunning blue dress. They had planned this, May arriving separately to avoid drawing attention. "I wouldn't miss it," Elena replied. "Things are happening faster than I expected, though." As if on cue, a commotion erupted near the ballroom doors. A woman Elena recognized as Blake's assistant hurried in, looking for him. When she couldn't find him, she approached one of the board members instead, showing him something on her tablet with an urgent expression. "What did you do?" May whispered. "I just made sure the right people saw the truth," Elena said. "Blake's been lying to everyone for so long, he probably can't even keep track of all his deceptions anymore." The evening unraveled quickly after that. Blake returned from the impromptu board meeting, his face ashen. He tried to continue mingling, but was constantly pulled aside by concerned investors and partners. The smooth, confident CEO was visibly cracking. When it was time for his speech, Blake took the stage. The room quieted, all eyes on the man who had promised to revolutionize the tech security industry. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady but lacking its usual charisma. Chen Technologies has always prided itself on integrity and innovation. From her spot near the back, Elena noticed a group of people entering the ballroom. They weren't dressed for a party. One showed credentials to security. "As we prepare to take this next step as a company," Blake continued, not noticing the newcomers, "I want to assure everyone that the recent rumors about our financial reporting are completely." Blake Chen, one of the newcomers, approached the stage. "I'm Agent Townsend with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We need to speak with you immediately regarding allegations of securities fraud." The ballroom went silent. Cameras flashed as reporters who had been covering the gala realized they were now witnessing a much bigger story. Blake stared at the federal agents, then at the crowd, his eyes finally finding Elena. In that moment, she saw something she'd never seen in him before: fear. As Blake was escorted from his own celebration, Elena slipped out a side door. Her work here was done. Tomorrow, every business publication would be covering the fall of Blake Chen, the tech wonderkind whose empire was built on lies. Her phone buzzed with a text from Raj. "Just saw the news. Are you okay?" Elena looked back at the hotel, thinking of the chaos she'd left behind. "Better than okay," she replied. "I'm free." 6 months later, Elena sat at an outdoor cafe, watching people pass by on the busy downtown street. The summer sun warmed her face as she sipped her coffee and flipped through a legal brief. She had returned to practicing law, accepting a position at a boutique firm specializing in corporate whistleblower cases. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Former tech CEO Blake Chen reaches plea deal in fraud case. Elena clicked on the article. Blake's company had collapsed spectacularly in the months following that fateful gala. The IPO was cancelled, investors pulled out, and clients abandoned the company once the security flaws became public. Most devastating was the criminal investigation that uncovered years of fraudulent practices. According to the article, Blake would avoid jail time but would pay a substantial fine and be banned from serving as an officer in any public company for 10 years. His carefully built empire and reputation were in ruins. Elena closed the article, surprised by her own reaction. There was no joy, no satisfaction, just a strange emptiness. The revenge that had consumed her for months now felt hollow. Is this seat taken? Elena looked up, startled to see Blake standing there. He looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and casual clothes instead of his usual designer suits. His billion-dollar swagger was gone. "What are you doing here?" Elena asked, closing her laptop. "I saw you through the window," Blake said. "I had a meeting with my lawyers down the street." He gestured to the empty chair again. 5 minutes. Please." Against her better judgment, Elena nodded. Blake sat down, his movements stiff and uncertain. "I'm not supposed to contact any former colleagues," he said quietly. "Part of the agreement, but I needed to talk to you." "I have nothing to say to you," Elena replied. "Then just listen." Blake stared at his hands on the table. I had a lot of time to think these past months. About who I became. About what I lost. He looked up at her. I know you were behind it all. The leaked documents. The tips to the board. You destroyed everything I built. You destroyed it yourself, Elena countered. I just made sure people saw the truth. Blake nodded slowly. You're right. That's what took me so long to understand. I did this to myself. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she once found endearing. I called off our wedding because I thought you were a liability for the IPO. The ultimate irony is that you might have saved me from myself if I'd just been honest with you. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the cafe and street filling the space between them. Are you happy now? Blake finally asked. Elena considered the question seriously. Not because of what happened to you. That didn't fix anything. But I am building something new, something real. I heard you're working on whistleblower cases, Blake said with a hint of his old smile. Fitting. It turns out I'm good at spotting liars, Elena replied dryly. Blake glanced at his watch and stood up. My 5 minutes are up. I'm moving back east next month. Fresh start. Or as fresh as an infamous ex-CTO can get. What will you do? Elena found herself asking, despite everything. Teach, maybe. Share my cautionary tale with business students. He paused. Elena, for what it's worth, and I know it's worth very little, I'm sorry, not just for the wedding, for all of it. Elena looked at him, this man she had once loved enough to marry, now humbled and facing the consequences of his actions. The anger that had fueled her for months had faded, leaving something unexpected in its place, perspective. Goodbye, Blake, she said softly. He nodded, understanding the finality in her words, and walked away without looking back. As Elena watched him disappear into the crowd, Mayne appeared, right on time for their lunch date. Was that? May asked, eyes wide as she took the seat Blake had vacated. A ghost from the past, Elena said. It doesn't matter anymore. Are you okay? May looked concerned. Elena smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. You know what? I really am. Later that afternoon, Elena stood in her new office, unpacking a box of books. On her desk sat a small cactus, a housewarming gift from Rage, who had joked that it was resilient, just like her. Her phone rang, a potential new client, referred by one of the former Chin Technologies employees she had helped find new positions. As she answered the call, Elena glanced at the framed article on her wall. Whistleblowers reveal tech fraud, the inside story. The journalists had kept their promise to protect her anonymity, but she kept the article as a reminder. Not of Blake, or the wedding that never happened, or even the revenge she had executed so perfectly, but of her own strength, which she had rediscovered along the way, and would never lose sight of again.